The voluntary human extinction movement seeks to end humanity by lowering birth rates. Today, Les Knight, the founder of the organization, will come on to talk about voluntary human extinction. I think maybe you should begin with your stance on suicide and murder just so that people don't get the wrong idea going in.
Yeah, who could be in favor of murder and suicide? Well, we need a lot more help for people who are suicidal because, you know, there's a lot of depression in the world and we really need to help people out. But if somebody wants to die, it's their choice. We in Oregon, we have the Death with Dignity bill so that anyone who is within 6 months of likely demise from an incurable disease has the right to take, they have to swallow the medication given by the doctor. And a lot of people don't. Like half the people who get the prescription have it and they don't take it, but they find it to be a great comfort. They know that if it ever gets too bad, they really can't stand it, they can take it and they will not have to be suffering anymore and cut that short. But as far as suicide and murder helping the population at all, no, even mass murder, even the COVID, like what, a couple million people, that's, we're increasing by 250,000 a day. So that hardly has any effect. And it's just tragic when people die early. It does no good at all.
So, what would you say is your primary reason for supporting human extinction?
Well, as we go, we can clean up all our messes and restore wildlife habitat. We'll be able to take care of everyone. We're not doing that now. And we may even stop fighting about resources that are becoming more scarce. We're even fighting over water. So there are human benefits and there are wildlife benefits. It's good for planet and people. If we were not around, the sixth extinction might slow down and even stop. We are bringing about the extinction of maybe 1 million species before we're done, and maybe more. We could cause the collapse of the biosphere, which would, of course, wipe us out as well. So the voluntary human extinction movement intends to go against the involuntary human extinction that we are working so hard to bring about.
So, would you say animals have moral worth in that case?
We are the only ones that would weigh that, yay or nay. But we're talking about wildlife, animals rather than our livestock. I don't think moral worth is a way to look at it. 70% of the birds on the planet are our farmed poultry. And if we were not here, they wouldn't exist. And the other 30% of birds would have a chance to, if they haven't gone extinct, flourish. And for mammals, 60% of the mammals on the planet are our livestock, our food animals. And we are 36% of the mammals. So between our food animals and ourselves, we represent 96% of the mammals on the planet. This is not a sustainable situation. If we weren't here, all of that suffering, the suffering that humans do, and the suffering that our livestock does, would be eliminated. And also the 70% of the birds that are like chickens and not in very pleasant situations would also be eliminated. Now, to get to back to your question, the wildlife, the species that were here before, have value just on their own. They have a right to exist, and we have no right to cause them to cease to exist.
Are you vegan?
No, I don't eat meat, and I try to limit eggs and dairy.
So, from that, I take it that you don't support animal extinction?
It depends on what animal. I support all the voluntary extinction, phasing out of all domesticated species, including ourselves. But the wildlife, I do not support their extinction, no.
If humanity reverted to an animalistic state, meaning how it was before civilization, would that be acceptable or preferable?
I think it's impossible, but we can answer it as a hypothetical. We've risen and we can't get down. But if only the most stupid of us were to be allowed to procreate, eventually we would be back to living within the biosphere as being eaten, eating what we could eke out, excreting, replicating. But what's the point, really? Our species is not all that necessary. It's not at all necessary. Uh, we don't need to create to cause us to become primitive just so that we'll still be around.
How do you plan on achieving human extinction? From growing your movement to implementing the ideas.
Well, the odds are pretty slim on it happening, but the odds compare favorably with the odds of us being able to feed 10 billion people. But first thing is reproductive freedom. We need everyone on the planet needs to be able to not procreate if they don't want to. And we're a long ways from that. Hundreds of millions of couples don't want to create more than they already have. They can't take care of them, and yet they're denied that ability through lack of reproductive freedom. So that's a first thing. Second, we've got to stop encouraging people to procreate. And a lot of times people are not just encouraged with child marriage and so on, they are forced into. They're coerced conceptions and mandatory motherhood. So we got to stop doing that. And the last one would be to, actually not the last one, there was a whole lot of things we need to do, but to encourage people not to procreate. So stop encouraging, start encouraging not to procreate, make it possible for everyone to not procreate. And that one actually, gender equality, the status of women, is the most important aspect of reproductive freedom, because even if contraceptives are available and women are still dominated by the patriarchy and are not allowed to use it, it doesn't do much good. So basically, we need people to be able to not procreate.
So you were getting at earlier that you think it's unlikely for the movement to succeed, but you do have a plan for achieving it. So my question would be, you don't support laws preventing childbirth, it sounds like, or you just support voluntary philosophical argumentation, it sounds like, so no laws or anything like that to achieve this?
Well, we've already got far too many laws regarding human procreation, and almost all of them restrict people's right to not procreate. There are all these new laws against terminating pregnancy and making it difficult for people to access contraception. All of those laws are predominant in reproductive laws, and those we need to definitely get rid of. So, but we don't need laws restricting people's reproductive freedom.
So in most countries, it seems like population rates are flattening, if not stopping. So do you see this as a good thing, as a step forward, or is it not enough?
Oh, every time birth rates go down, it's a good thing, especially if they're going down voluntarily through reproductive freedom. The rate of population increase has gone down and is still going down, but there's such momentum that it's not really having a tremendous effect. In 1950, there were 3.5 billion people, and the total fertility rate was 5. The average number of offspring that a woman has in her lifetime was 5, and we were increasing by 35 million. Now the total fertility rate is only 2.4, and yet we are increasing by about 80 million. So we have double the increase with half the fertility. This is the momentum and also the larger base. There are more of us having fewer of us. And so when people talk about replacement level fertility, it's really misleading, because replacement level fertility of 2.1 doesn't mean we've stopped increasing. The US is down to about 1.8, and we're still increasing our natural increase by almost a million a year.
If you're comfortable talking about it, what are your religious beliefs and how do they relate to voluntary human extinction?
There's a wide range within the movement. I personally am not religious, and I think it helps to not have a deity and an afterlife in thinking about our extinction. But you don't need to. There are passages in all religious texts that support the idea of no humans being on the planet. In the Christian texts, we are absent from God when we're not dead. And so our death and eventually going to heaven to being with God and Jesus is a good thing. So even religions that we think of as fertility cults would also include, if they wanted to, the idea of voluntary human extinction. Now, the churches would not go for that because they want more parishioners.
So, if new young people stop being born, who will care for the elderly of society?
Who's caring for them now? No, that is a very common concern. Every article that you read about birth rates declining say that this is going to be a serious problem for the pensioners. But this is 19th century thinking. We have automation now, and if we plan ahead, there's no problem taking care of older people. And a lot of people these days, it isn't like they hit 60 or 70 and they have to be cared for. People take care of themselves clear into their 80s. It's not, they do need the money that they have put aside, their retirement benefits, but people who have worked all their lives putting money away deserve, a couple of decades of not having to work, although most people still do work. I'm 73 and I'm still working.
What are your thoughts on China's one-child policy? It's from earlier, it sounds like you'd be against it, but if you have any specific opinions on that.
Sure. Yeah, it's involuntary, so that's not part of vehement, and also one is too many. Birth rate was already dropping in China before they instituted that, and it kind of caused a plateau of the shrinking fertility rate. I think people thought, they're liable to take away our right to have any at all, and so they made up for it. These policies, whether it's to increase population or decrease population, aren't really very effective. They now have a two-child maximum, and it has not really changed the birth rate very much. It did at first, like, oh boy, now we can have two, but that was a very short-lived event. When people stop having as many offspring, they find that it benefits everyone, including their offspring. They're better able to take care of them, and they just start liking the idea. And a lot of people who haven't procreated at all finally have the approval of society not to, and they get to liking the idea too. So once a society allows people not to procreate and gives them the wherewithal, they aren't inclined to start back up again. Iran is a good example of that. They reduced their fertility rate tremendously, totally voluntary, by giving everyone access. They went to the rural areas and made sure everybody who didn't want to procreate had it. Their planning, and their birth rate dropped tremendously. Now they've got a conservative, I guess you'd call it, more right-wing government, and they are taking away contraceptive availability in hopes of boosting their population again.
So while humanity still exists, do you personally support any political movements, even if it's not directly related to?
The only political movements that would go along with vehement are ones which grant reproductive freedom, and that's a lot. So if a candidate says that they call themselves pro-life, which is a misnomer, if they say they don't think that women have a right to terminate their pregnancy, then that politician would not be in line with vehement. If they, on the other hand, say we're going to eliminate the gag rule and expand women's access to contraception, well, then that's a candidate and a platform that would be supported.
So what was your path to these ideas? How did you end up believing what you believe?
I think, like a lot of people, I just looked around. Every problem, when you start trying to solve it, every one of them run up against the fact that there are so many of us. I want to stop deforestation. Well, people got to have houses. What are you going to do? Wildlife habitat is being lost. Well, people have to live somewhere. So every time you look at solving a problem, the fact that we are increasing and we're already way into overshoot keeps coming to the fore. So in the early 70s, there was an organization called Zero Population Growth. And of course, I joined. And their slogan was stop at 2 offspring. But it was apparent that stopping at 2 was not going to be sufficient at all. That was an easy win because that's what people were doing anyway. So I thought, well, we've got to stop at once. And what's the why should we have any at all? Every one of us, especially in the wealthy world, is a great detriment to wildlife, to the biosphere. Since then, I've become more concerned about people born today. Anyone born today, the next 80 years is not likely to have a really pleasant existence unless we make some really serious changes. And it doesn't look like we're inclined to do that. Earth is likely to be uninhabitable by the end of this century, which is as long as somebody potentially could live who's born today. So I followed a train of logic guided by love and arrived at the conclusion that we should not have humans on the planet. And the best way to do it would be through phasing out, just a natural attrition. Nobody dies early. We just don't create more.
So do you have anything else you'd like to mention? Any resources, books, closing thoughts, anything like that?
Yeah, it's on the website. There's a lot of information, and I hope it's entertaining and educational. It's vehement.org, VHEMT.org. And I think people will find something. If they skim through it, they should find something of use there.
Thanks for coming on. I found that really interesting, and I'm sure my audience will too. So thanks for coming on.
You bet.
I'll see you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for coming on, and thanks for watching. You can find his links in the description below. I'll see you. Goodbye.